Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast. I hope this episode helps you thrive in life and leadership. And if you like it, hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, and that way you'll never miss a thing. Well, if you're like me, you're always looking for ways to stay informed and engaged with the world around us. And that's why I created On the Rise. It's a curated weekly newsletter packed with thought-provoking articles and insights on faith, culture, and the future of the church, and really any other subject that I find fascinating and conversation worthy. And I send it to you absolutely free every single week. So if you're ready to join the conversation and be part of a community of curious, engaged leaders, you can subscribe to On the Rise today at ontherisenewsletter.com. You can start and stop at any point on ontherisenewsletter.com. This episode is also presented by Glue. Glue is connecting the faith ecosystem in innovative ways. One way is by making it a lot easier for churches to connect with new visitors. Did you know, for example, that the time it takes for a church to respond to new visitors has a major impact on whether that new person or family will stay? Well, with Glue, you can use automation to build engaging new visitor engagement journeys. You can learn how at get.glue.us/visitors. That's get.glue.us/visitors. And now to today's episode. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you.
Well, so am I, because you seem to share something in common, your fascination, and I guess you're recovering from it as well. A lot of people I know, a lot of leaders I know, a lot of churches and organizations I know seem to struggle with this addiction to chaos and drama. Can you explain what you mean by that? And how do you know you're addicted to drama?
Typically, you don't know, which is part of the issue. But you know, when we think of drama, it's the unnecessary turmoil. It's the intensification. It's the making something more extreme. It's the taking a molehill and making a mountain out of it. It's the performative extreme of a feeling and a reaction. It's a disproportionate reaction to what's actually happening in the environment typically.
Right.
You know, that's, you know, and an addiction means a dependency on it. And this is the part that's so hard for, I think, a lot of us to understand conceptually, because, you know, if we think about it, like, why would anyone be dependent on things that make them suffer? Things that bring them conflict, things that bring them more stress and challenge. And we have to turn to the physiology, which we can today, to really understand why. But the dependency or an addiction means they become reliant on the hits of it. An addiction is often about filling a void, filling a pain, a void that is within oneself, and masking a pain, numbing it out. And so if someone becomes dependent on cocaine or any type of drug or alcohol or gambling or sex or stress, which is what we're talking about when we're talking about drama, it means that it serves a purpose. And that purpose is it's occupying their attention, distracting them from the underlying pain and trauma, and creating some level of numbness and giving them some level of sensation and feeling that rises above that numbness. Because otherwise, we just feel kind of like dead man walking, like a walking ghost. And that gives us that sense of walking ghost, that sense of vacantness is very unsettling. It's very painful. I mean, we know it on some level of, like, if you've ever had an episode of depression or sad for a long period of time where it feels some level of stagnancy and numbness. And you're like, do I even exist? Do I matter? Do I have purpose? And I think often in those moments, we might even lose our relationship to spirituality. We feel cut off from anything more than our pain body. So if we put those things together now, it's that there is something about the intensification, the turmoil, the stress that we become dependent on, we become reliant on as a way of essentially surviving.
Gotcha. Okay, so, you know, probably your book your book, Addicted to Drama, did a great job playing it out, like more than I thought was possible. I thought you did a great job, but probably the concept that I got introduced to years ago in leadership, you talk to leaders and they're like, what are you doing today? It's like, I'm fighting fires. And then, they're fighting fires every day. And eventually it's like, well, maybe you're an arsonist. Like, are there that many fires? Right? So like, are you the arsonist? And you're right. Is that a sense of like, if you're always fighting fires, if there's always a crisis, if there's always challenges, and I mean, stuff happens. I had a day yesterday where I'm like, okay, whoa, I didn't see that coming. Yeah. But that's not most days. But if you're always fighting fires, are you an arsonist? Does that have something to do with it?
I love that saying so much. I've never heard it put that way.
Oh,
it's
really?
so brilliant. Yeah, because it's like, are you the problem? And it's like, which is such a, are you the drama, essentially, is another way of saying that. And the answer is probably. Yeah. To some level, we all have the capacity to use the tools of drama. It helps us, it's called auto-regulation. We stay away. It helps us keep away from being in contact with our feelings. And it's distracting. And we become enticed in someone else's drama. And that's distracting from ourselves. It's entertaining at times. It's like, if I don't know if you've ever, I know you bike, right?
Yeah, I cycle.
Okay. So I'm a runner, and but I've done a little bit of biking, and that high you get, that endorphic high when you've done a lot. Well, guess what? Stress does the same thing. So in that first stage of a stress response, which is called activation, we get an endorphic high. It gives us a sense of power. It's the same thing, like, I don't know if you've ever found yourself in a fit of rage or anger. And it's like,
perhaps.
I don't know, as a leader, maybe once.
Theoretically, sure.
This morning.
Exactly.
And it's this, if you tune into it a little bit, besides the emotional overwhelm of it, you might also feel some level of power. And for those who have a history of pain or trauma or powerlessness, which is a lot of us, then going towards those big states, those big emotional states, specifically stress states that give us this sense of like we have this extra battery pack on us, this liveliness, then we're going to become attached to that.
So it's interesting. You sort of admit in the book that this was part of your story too, right? You would say, oh, wait a minute, I'm addicted to drama. And then you wrote this amazing treatise about it and how to get well. Yeah. How did that manifest in your life, Scott?
Look, I mean, there was always something. Something was always going to go wrong. Something,
and that's a sign, right? Somebody who like I've got friends and other people I know who are like, yep, there's always something. It doesn't matter what it is. This is just always something, right?
Yeah, it's always something, and it is always something, because part of what happens when you have this history that is perhaps a threat or stressful, pervasive stress or trauma in your life, is that you become more attuned to your own negative bias. It's like your senses, you get locked in to being on the lookout for what will and can go wrong. And I say that as in, seriously, you get locked in. Your senses, your eyes, your smell, your hearing, your sense of time, your sense of touch, all look for threat. And you're going to only be able to see or be vigilant towards potential or actual threat. And if there is no threat, that creates a sense of dissonance or anxiety or dis-ease or being out of sync. So what do? You go seek it. And if you can't find it, you go create it. Because what that does is it offers a sense of, I am right. I am in sync with the threats of the world.
Wow. So this is a little bit like, could it also, this is not what your book is about. This is not what your research is about. But is that a little bit like hypochondria? It's like, I just can't be well or not? Is that different? That's a different disorder?
It's a little bit different in the sense that, there is something about a pervasive, what I would say about hypochondria is that sometimes that is instilled because it becomes the love language. Like if you grew up in a house of chaos or an environment of chaos, and the only times you're seen is when something is wrong, then that becomes the currency of love. You're ill, you are witnessed, you are loved. And so, yeah, and for those of us who, again, have some propensity for drama inside, and I can say this because I lived it for most of my life, there is a sense of dis-ease, like something is wrong and you can't quite put your finger on it. And part of it is the pain that is literally stuck in your body, creating a toxic, stagnated environment. And so there is something wrong, but you can't consciously track that. So, when something is wrong, usually in the environment or with someone else, if you're in a relationship, then it feels validated. And in hypochondria, it's the same thing. It's like, oh, you're attending to me. I matter. I have value in this world. And so I am going to potentially be more attuned towards what could be wrong.
So how did There's Always Something addiction to drama manifest in your life? What would be some symptoms that would have shown up in you before you started to pay attention to this?
Well, thankfully, I was put into the arts very young. So I had a venue, a depository for a lot of my big reactionary feelings and energy.
You were supposed to be dramatic.
I got to be dramatic. I was rewarded for it. Yeah. And, it was that excitement of going in front of 1,000 people and performing or filming something as a, child actor. But that sort of excitement didn't, and the need for it didn't subside. It wasn't met by just doing the performance. Like I was looking for it in the rest of my life. I would pick fights with people a lot. I would over-exaggerate and intensify stories. I would fantasize about things as strange as like telling other people bad news. And it wasn't that I wanted those bad things to happen. I just wanted to play, the thing about fantasy that we might not realize is that a stress response will happen whether it's real or imagined. You think about a snake or you see a snake, you're going to have a physiological response. So our fantasy is a playground for where we get to fester and create drama. Like every time I'm walking down the street and I think about an ex, or I'm in the bathtub and I think about my grocery list, or I think about a fight I might have with someone because they didn't do this or that, or I'm at work and maybe I think about like, oh, if they don't get this done, this is what I'm going to say to them. And this is what they're going to say back. And you're going through the whole show that you're writing in your head and it never happened.
Fair. Yeah.
Right? You've done that.
Yeah. Perhaps.
And meanwhile, you're in the bathtub. What are you doing? Creating more tension in an environment where you're trying to relax.
Wow.
And yet we've all done it.
So, we're 15 minutes into this conversation. People are probably going, am I addicted to drama or not? And when I read your characteristics, I felt called out. And then I thought, don't show my wife, don't show my sons, because they're going to go, you're addicted to drama. And perhaps worse 20 years ago than I am now, but there are elements my wife will often say to me, you're so dramatic. Like, let me give you an example.
Yeah, please.
I know pastors, a lot of pastors listening to this, they're getting up to give their message. There's always something wrong before their message. Talking to a friend, right? The camera angle isn't quite right. The light level isn't quite right. The band isn't quite right. The worship leader's a little bit off. And it gets in their head. And sometimes they say it out loud and then they get told they're leaking. But to me, I've eventually figured out, man, those are my nerves externalizing on other people. And my job is to show up and thank the people who are here, smile at them, be gracious, and channel my nerves in some other direction that's healthy. Or, there was like, I have that tendency in me. If I look back over my first 20 years of leadership, I've said I probably throw a stick of dynamite into stuff every 5 years, blow it up and start over again. And some of that's good.
It's a strategy.
Some of that's not good. It's a strategy. It works.
A strategy. I'm not sure.
It got us somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, I really hear you when you describe this experience of going, you have some nerves, you have some vulnerability. And, when you are, instead of being in contact with those feelings or that vulnerability, you're depositing it into situations or other people to which then stoke your own fire to be more avoidant of those feelings and of that vulnerability.
Oh, wow. I don't know if you follow the Enneagram. I'm an 8, and our greatest fear is intimacy and vulnerability. So there you go. There you go. I've gotten better at it. So what are some other symptoms? You tell some great stories in the book of actual clients. I think they're actual clients, or maybe they're composite stories of people who really struggled with this. But give us just a range of examples, characteristics, so that everybody listening here can go, yeah, that's me. Or if it's not them, it's like, oh, I know who that is on my staff. I know who I'm married to, or that's my mom.
That's my mother-in-law.
That's my mother-in-law. Yeah. So that they can recognize what we're talking about. Exactly, Scott.
Yeah. So there's signs from the inside and signs from the outside. And they're different. And that's an important thing for us to discern, because on the outside, it's like, ooh, there's always some crazy urgency. They're walking down the street, they have nowhere to go, but they are rushing. There's this bulldozing, there's this overscheduling, and then complaining about the overscheduling, even though they were the ones who scheduled it. There's this overcomplicating tasks, especially in the office. It's like something that should just be like, you put a stamp on the envelope, you put the envelope in the chute, but it becomes a whole ordeal. They overcomplicate it. There's a lot of gossiping. Those are certainly big ones. They catastrophize. They really focus on the negative. It's hard for them to be with or attend to the positive. Are ones. I mean, do you have ones from I can name some more, but do you have ones from just, clearly being witness to some people who are addicted to drama?
Well, I think there's a couple of cases in your book, and I read it a few weeks ago, where it's just the person who always has a crisis in their life, right? There's always something wrong. And I think sometimes that's a leader, but often we end up serving a lot of people like that. Like you said, if it's not one thing, it's another. So what is, like, describe that a little bit more?
Yeah. I mean, that goes back to, and it's hard because if from the inside, they would be like, it's not my fault. I want peace. I want ease. I want comfort. So, why would I be the culprit of this? And the reality is because they have sought the conditions or created the environmental conditions that would create that scenario. And that's hard to recognize. It's like, look, you can't help if someone gets in a car accident that you love. We're not talking about that.
No.
We're talking about
that's probably not happening every other month, right?
No. But we're talking about like, oh, I got into another breakup or I got into another fight. Relationships are fast and furious to begin with and fast and furious in the end. It's a very reactionary. There's a lot of intensified language, exclamation marks, using additional adjectives than are what's needed. There's a disproportion between, like I said in the very beginning, what's the reaction that's called for and the energy needed for that reaction and what that person actually does. So it's like
disproportionate. Little things happen all the time, right? Like that does happen.
We call that dysregulation.
Right. So my neighbor was too loud, but it's really irritating me.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was a 3, I'm an 11, right?
You're really into the anagrams. Yeah, it's like blowing out a birthday candle with a fire hose. It doesn't make sense from the outside. It's like, oh, it's sprinkling, so we go into the hurricane shelter. It's like, those. I'm clearly exaggerating, or am I?
Or am I? Maybe not.
I might have gone into a hurricane shelter when it was sprinkling out. living in Florida, you just never know.
You never know.
From the inside, it's different symptoms. And this is the wild thing is like, and what makes it such a challenging and for people to be such a challenging experience for people to be empathetic to.
Yeah.
Because it wears and tears on those around the person who's addicted to drama. But on the inside, they feel like a victim. They feel like the world is attacking them and closing in on them. They feel like they never have enough time. They feel that sense of urgency, like the world is pushing at them. They don't feel like they have agency and control. And there's a constant sense of dis-ease, anxiety.
Yes. So I'm going to read through some of the symptoms that you've got in your book, Addicted to Drama. And I'd like you to comment on these. I'll read them to you in a series because they're so subtle. That's why I'm like, oh, this is about other people. And I know people who are addicted to drama. And then I'm like, page 14, do I have a propensity for drama? And I'm like, burn the book. Like, let's just get rid of this right now, Scott. Okay. But I'm going to read these out. This is me in my 30s. I feel anxious or bored when things are calm. Uh-oh, not so much anymore. Compliments or validation are difficult for me to receive. I feel more alive or thrive under pressure. Whoops. I recruit others to my state of being, pulling them into my whirlwind. I am preoccupied. I'm preoccupied with fixing things. It's like, whoo. Okay, I'm going to pass by a few others and let's see. Oh, yeah. My attention wanders in the middle of conversations, which is really an interesting one. I didn't think that would be a sign of drama. I've seen this in other leaders. During intense situations, I feel a sense of agency or control. Actually, I would say that describes me. This one, yeah. I live in the past and the future rather than the present, though compulsive worry, repetitive thought stories, or projecting trouble in the future through compulsive worry, repetitive thoughts, stories, or projecting trouble into the future. Not so much the negative, but I do live in the past and in the future. I've seen this in other leaders. I don't feel this way, but I sense that another person or the world conspires against me, and I wonder why me. And let me see, there was another one. Oh yeah, I always fill my schedule to the brim and then feel overwhelmed by it. I get caught up in an emotional whirlwind and feel hungover afterward. That's every Monday for most church leaders. And let's leave it there. Okay, there's a whole bunch more, but I'm like,
I love that you read those because, I was like, oh, those are good. And I'm like, I wrote those.
Early on in the book, they weren't, you had to get to chapter whatever at the end. But that's like when I read that, I'm like, oh, a lot of us get caught by that. And I didn't realize, like, in some of those, I'd say 3/4 of those could be seen as a strength.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the future. I am a busy guy. I don't get overwhelmed anymore. I wrote my book on that last time. But, all of those I am somewhat familiar with, and one or two I've definitely seen in other people as well. So why are those signs that you're addicted to drama?
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing about it, is that we can go, oh, well, if someone's just overscheduling, couldn't they just be addicted to work? Or if they're just rushing all the time, maybe they have somewhere to go. And it all comes back to, how is this affecting your physiology? Is it inducing a stress response?
Mm-hmm.
And then we're looking at the dependency of those hits of stress. So is the urgency, the rush, the like making something more intense in that way, creating a stress response? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Is overscheduling in that way inducing a stress response? Yes. Is pulling other people into your crisis, throwing logs on your fire, and upping the stress response in your own body? Yes. Is gossiping upping your stress response? Yes. So they're all doing the same physiological thing. And then there's the dependency on that physiological process. And you asked about like attention. So, if our attention is constantly wandering, yeah, we could call it ADHD or something of that nature, or ADD rather. But there's a way of like, what are you wandering to? Are you, can you be present with another individual in another situation? Or is the wandering a way of avoiding the intimacy? So the wandering towards something that's stressful, perhaps, or even gleeful, it's having a physiological response that helps you avoid.
And you're saying, I believe, that these pathways, we're learning so much about the brain in the last 10, 20 years, but these pathways, there's one guy, sadly, he died at 49 on a ski hill of a heart attack, which is too bad. But Craig Jutila, one of the first episodes of this podcast years ago, talked about being an adrenaline junkie, and I would say I'm probably a recovering performance addict and a recovering adrenaline junkie. I just love to go and didn't have a brake pedal. Then I burned out, and I think God put on the brakes. It's like, all right, so I got to learn how to pump them from time to time. Yeah. But, I was very uncomfortable with silence, much better at it today. But like you're saying, these pathways get worn into your brain to the point where you are uncomfortable with silence or calm or peace, or like what?
Silence, comfort, peace, stillness feels like an attack.
Ooh.
It is a threat to the individual's hypervigilance to be on the lookout for threat.
Wow.
So it is a threat to being on the lookout for threat. And that's one piece of it. So when I talked about, that first stage of a stress response, giving you that sort of, that high that feels empowering, it also reduces pain. So it is a pain reliever. So, let's remember that underlying any addiction is a pervasive pain. Mm-hmm. So these things like stress or drugs that take us away, numb the pain, we become dependent on. We have a whole brain circuitry that says, let's reward this, because it is really awful to be in chronic pain. And there are certain conditions, especially things like loneliness and isolation, which is very much part of an addiction to drama. Those who are addicted to drama, one of the internal symptoms is they constantly feel alone, even in the company of other people. And so we know that you are more likely to become hooked on something in the absence of belonging, in the absence of a sense of connection. So they're already set up in this way to become hooked on the thing that relieves the pain and fills the void. And by fills the void, I mean occupies you in a way that keeps you out of connection with the pain, with the trauma, with having to feel your feelings. So that avoidance technique. There are certain stages or elements that need to be present in an addiction. Things like tolerance, things like withdrawal, things like negating social consequences for the drug because you need it. And if you look around and you think of anyone you know addicted to drama, do you think they're taking consideration of the social consequences of their behavior?
No, their impact on others is pretty low on their self-awareness scale.
Yeah,
they don't
and
understand.
It's a massive consequence because their stress response, their being in the throes of a drama and crisis and chaos, not only affects the environment, but every single person in the environment, because stress is contagious.
Wow.
So that's one element. Tolerance is real. I used to think that I had a lot of capacity for stress. And most of us probably do. Oh yeah, I can handle so much stress. It's not that we can handle it. There's a big difference between capacity and having built a tolerance level like we might for alcohol. And so like in my childhood, by the time I was in my 20s, I had built a high threshold tolerance. And the tolerance means that we need more to feel more. Right. And in this case, we need more stress to feel more alive, to rise above the level of numbness, or to rise above the threshold of numbness that's created as a protective mechanism for the underlying pain. So by the time in my 20s, I was in the midst of a divorce. I was in grad school. I was directing an opera, then the biggest show work of my life. It was with this huge rock band. I was constantly nervous about getting fired and would they overdose? And I was in a fight with a good friend, and I had lost my health insurance, yada, 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 add, more. And I was like, I can handle it. And then I OD'd. I OD'd on literally? Stress.
Oh, on stress.
Well, I did too.
Yeah.
I did go into cardiac distress and die for a few minutes.
Oh, wow.
But I thought all that time I had built up this capacity for stress, that I was some monk. As opposed to, I had become so dependent on it and needed so much more to feel more. And I crashed. I burnt out. Another way of saying crash is burning out, because we had added so many stressors to our life because we were needing it to get the hit that is big enough to feel alive. And I crashed. And that happens often with those who have an addiction. And part of an addiction and drama is you will go through withdrawal symptoms. You named it. It's the Monday after the service. It's that big performative experience. It's emotional, it's energetic, it's exciting, it's revelatory, and then it's nothing. And you feel bored, and you feel anxious, and you feel worthless. And that's all part of the withdrawal response that is part of the addiction to drama. And so what do you do to avoid the boredom, the sense of purposelessness, the sense of nothingness, the sense of anxiety, the feeling of anxiety? You go get another hit of drama.
Wow. Honestly, I think at this point you're reading the mail of about 80 and 90% of the people listening to this podcast. I really do. I really do. Yeah, this is really, really helpful and diagnostic. And I mean, I've spent the last 18 years trying to get off that treadmill. And with some success. I don't think total success, but with definitely some success. You talk about the relationship between drama addiction and burnout. You hinted at it just a minute ago. Can you explain more about how those are connected?
Yeah. There's some great research that came out of Argentina that was studying why some actors, after they perform, have burnout or withdrawal symptoms from the performance and why others don't. And NYU then later did a follow-up study that's saying that there's an emotional residue that for some doesn't get metabolized. And it leaves us in kind of a drunk state, a hangover state. It's called emotional hangover, by the way, the research. And
we call it preaching hangover, but same
preaching
thing.
hangover.
Yeah.
Okay, we're on the same page here. Isn't it amazing how there might not have been research in the peer-reviewed scientific world, but we all know it. We all know addiction to drama.
We all know it.
We didn't need my book to know that there's an addiction to drama. My book is just there to validate it and hopefully help some folks who are either addicted to drama or in proximity to those who are. But yeah, so that hangover, that withdrawal symptom comes as part of the hangover. We want to avoid I don't know. I mean, I don't drink, but I never really I maybe had a hangover once in my life.
Sure.
But I actually remember it now. It was my sister's wedding, and I just have never really drank. And my cousin spiked my juice. at the party the night before. And so the next day I had such a hangover from, the sugar and the alcohol and, the lack of control that I even knew I was drinking. I remember my mom came over. I was hiding under a table at my sister's wedding, just like moaning and she was like, "You have to bite the dog that bit you. It's the only way to get through this." And so they went and got me another drink. And I'm just remembering this story now. And it's so funny because I had been doing that all my life with drama, but never drugs. I mean, drama is a drug. It's a free, accessible drug that gets you high.
Yeah. Yeah.
It serves the same purpose.
Wow. And I think what preachers would describe and communicators, and it's funny, preaching is different than communication. I speak at a lot of conferences. I don't preach as much these days, but I preached recently, and it's like, you just put so much out there, there's nothing left. And people talk about the Sunday nap, Monday being brain fog, et cetera. And then eventually it comes back. But help me understand, in that study from Brazil, Peru, where was it?
Argentina.
None of the above.
None of the above. Nice.
None of the above. Argentina, pardon me, my South American listeners. In Argentina, that study in Argentina, you said that there are some people who don't have that kind of hangover. And what is the difference?
I don't remember all the research on specifically why people didn't. I was much more attracted to the idea of people did.
Oh, right. I didn't know that anyone didn't. So
I think it's less it was on a scale.
Yeah, sure.
And so I think some people methylate their emotions more easily than others. I can even imagine it related to more of, when I talk about methylation or metabolism or any of those, that there might actually be a physiological correlation. I don't think they did that much of the research. I think they got really excited that there is emotional residue and focused more on that.
What does that mean, emotional residue?
That the event is shorter than the emotional response.
Ah, there you go.
That's the residue. It's lasting longer than the stimulus.
But then you need another hit. So you might go into the office Monday or Tuesday and stir something up, or, become that arsonist, or, I
mean, when you have a residue, so a residue like that, but there's no conditions, there's no circumstances that justify it, why not go create the circumstances that will, again, justify the emotional residue that has stayed much longer in stagnation than the experience or event itself?
You make the argument, I think, that drama addiction affects decision-making and other leadership responsibilities. In what ways, Scott?
Well, let's look at in a stress response. One of the things that happens is there's less blood flow to your prefrontal cortex, where decision-making is happening.
So you're cutting off your blood flow to your brain.
You're cutting off your blood flow to your decision-making, that's for sure, because you're in more of a primal response.
Yeah.
And so if you're more chronically in a primal response, then you're not going to be, really sending blood, sending cellular food. That's not quite the right way to say it, but, the things we need to function in an area of our body or brain, we're not going to put more of the effort and the energy and the resources there. We're going to put them into exactly where we need them to navigate, whether it's a threat or a challenge that we've created, that we're in. So decision-making is not easy from that state. We don't make our best decisions, even though some people, in the research on flow and decision-making, which is interesting, it requires what they call a balance of sympathetic and parasympathetic, a balance of some activation and an ability to be containing it and settled within it. And then we make, actually, in that research, the best decisions because we have some energy to help us make the decisions and still a calm enough mind that we can see our choices. because we lose agency in that state of constant chronic drama. We lose our ability to register and see our choices.
I think most people who listen to this podcast, most leaders would identify with that state of flow, whatever they call it. But, as somebody who's written 5 books, written a bajillion messages and talks and that kind of stuff, that takes deep concentration.
Oh, yeah.
And when you get there, you can't be hyperstimulated. You can't be dramatic. You just have to be in that state where you're not sedated, but you're not elevated either.
Yeah.
Right. And when you hit that state, and for me, it happens in the morning, I call it the green zone, it's bliss. And so I guess, I want to get into more of the symptoms, and then I want to get into the recovery, because I'm almost saying, so how do you get out of this? So we're going to come back to that. Let's put a pin in that. But you also talk about the drama triangle, which was really interesting. My wife's been doing some research and some work in this area. And I found it fascinating, because as soon as she described the triangle, it had a different name in the work that she was doing. I'm like, oh, that describes so much. Can you explain the drama triangle and what that means?
Yeah, so the drama triangle comes from a social theorist or psychological theorist, Cartman. And it's really saying, like, what are the roles we take when we're in conflict?
Right.
And he looks at the 3 main roles and how they play out with each other. And those 3 roles are the victim, which we all might know a little bit of, and the victim, the persecutor, and the rescuer. The rescuer is like the hero. There's a little bit more like, I'm going to save you. I'm going to avoid my own stuff and what's happening with me to attend to you. We call that codependency. Yeah. And it's also the rescuer will often enable the victim. And the victim is the one who's saying, poor me. Why is everyone against me? And if you're listening, you've ever found yourself in any of these roles in conflict, welcome to being human.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything is futile. There's a sense of helplessness. Things are not going to go. There's a sense of powerlessness, and that's and they often will seek, especially the rescuer, to throw logs on their fire. So one of the symptoms you read from my book was that they'll pull people into their crisis. And that is the way that those who are addicted to drama feel most safe with intimacy, is when there is a shared crisis. Call that drama bonding. And it's the only safe way in which they can be in relation with another person. And they feel like they're validated because people are in that same zone of crisis as they are. They feel in sync. Thus, a false sense of belonging.
And this plays out in a lot of organizations.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Right?
This is very much an organizational psychology too, where, and then you have the persecutor, like often the boss, where it's like the villain, it's the blame. They're really into deflecting and projecting. They're not taking any responsibility either. And it's often angry and negative, and the sense of superiority that comes in those. And we can switch roles. Like, we might find ourselves identifying or defaulting to one particular aspect of that drama triangle or one role in conflict. But it's so easy to go from being the victim to then being the persecutor.
Yeah.
Or being the persecutor and then becoming the victim. Often the rescuer is kind of on the outside. And we might think about how that shows up is like, someone comes to your office and gossips. Do you gossip with them? Oh, you might say you hate gossip. You might say you hate the drama, but they go, oh, they said this and they said that. And then you ask, well, then what did they say?
Yeah, exactly.
You're enabling the drama. We don't think, often we might think, oh, I'm rescuing, I'm here to support everyone. I just want to help. I'm a martyr. But the reality is you're enabling.
Mm-hmm.
You're actually also addicted to the drama. You're just wearing the mask of the hero.
So the victim likes the drama, the persecutor likes the drama, and even the rescuer kind of likes the drama.
Oh,
And
hate
I
the
think
drama,
that profile,
but need the drama.
Need it. Right, right.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And what is weaponized empathy?
Oh, that's a term I made up from being in so many therapy sessions. And yeah, I love the term. I actually have a t-shirt coming out with it.
Weaponized empathy.
It's like such a great term.
It is.
But weaponized empathy is basically an eye for an eye. It's the inability to feel validated when someone apologizes. So you make them feel, you create the circumstances to make them feel what you feel. So an example might be, I have a client who was talking about this recently, and he said, oh, I was on a walk with my parent, my mom, and I texted my brother, happy birthday. My mom felt like I was disrespecting her. And so she just said, that's it, I'm done, and started walking back to the house. Drama flare number one. Clearly feeling rejected, clearly having emotions, but just threw the arms up, started walking back. Then the mom came back and knew the exact thing to say to my client to trigger him. Oh, I think you're really becoming more codependent with your partner, is what the mom said, which is the exact trigger, the very thing they're worried about. So then my client is all stirred up and feeling like shameful and rejected by their partner. And so what the mom did in that moment was, in her inability to be with her own feelings, and she's infamous for weaponized empathy, is to create the circumstances so that her kid would know the pain that she felt when she was, quote unquote, rejected.
I feel bad. Now I'm going to make you feel bad.
Yes.
And
it is like, even if you were to say, I'm sorry, no, that's not enough, because I actually can't receive your sorry. I would have to be vulnerable enough to open up the windows of my very locked house to receive your apology. That's too vulnerable, because then I'd be too susceptible to future threats, to future pains. And so if I can't accept it, I can create the chaos needed in your life, in your environment, so that you feel the pain I feel locked away in my house.
Okay.
Weaponized empathy.
So this feels like an inescapable, it's sort of Jean-Paul Sartre, hell is other people, right? Yeah. you end up in that place.
There's no win. There is no win. I've certainly been in scenarios with someone recently where they were upset by someone I was working with or teaching with, and they felt like they didn't like them. And I said, I'm so sorry you had that experience with them. That hasn't been my experience, and I'm holding your truth and mine. They're like, how dare you invalidate my truth? And I was like, I hear how it can feel like I'm invalidating your truth to also represent mine. And they're like, you don't hear anything I say. And just like, no matter, and then I stopped and I said, you're right, I'm not hearing you. And I'm really sorry for that. And is there anything I can do to support you in this moment? No, it's too late. You don't hear anyone. You're not a good therapist. No matter what I say, it's logs on their fire. It's a no-win situation, because what they really need in that moment is to enact the hurt that they feel inside them that they're unable to really be with or process or metabolize. They need me to be in sync with them. And until I am in the same woe, in the same in the same pain, in their perception, then there is no justice.
So tell us there's a way through, doctor. Like, is this just...
There's no way through.
Well, thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, have a good day.
Lyons. Yeah, have a good day. Like what do you do when you're in this? Because I think lots of light bulbs are going off, on, I should say, and people are going, gosh, I see this everywhere now, and I see it in myself, I see it in others, I see it in my staff, I see it in the congregation, I see it in the community, I see it in my customers. That customer that's completely unpleasable, the person who's always got a problem, the person who sends you an angry email every month because there's something you did this time that isn't quite right. And it's like, nobody really knows how to solve this stuff. So what do you do?
I think knowledge is power. I don't think it's absolute power, but I think understanding where this is coming from can even give you empathy towards that individual and empathy towards yourself. Like when that person was saying that, I was like, oh, honey, I wrote a book on this. Like, I'm not affected. Like, I know you want to get me to that point where I'm affected, but I'm not. Like, I'm not willing to enter into that pain body so that you can feel validated and seen. That is my boundary. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then I sent them a copy of my book. But knowledge has power. It's going, okay, this is what's happening. Oh, they are revving themselves back up. This has nothing to do with me or the actual circumstances. This is their physiological dependency. Can I take a step back from getting enmeshed in that? Can I take a step back from feeling like, oh, maybe this is me? Or can I take a step back from they're a bad person? Because that does something to me. To sit with this idea that they're just an attention-seeking bad human being, that they're evil, that they're manipulative. They're not. They're doing the best they can in their survival mode. So there's a lot of reprieve that can come from just understanding what is happening in the circumstances that are occurring. And, if you are someone who has an addiction to drama, then there's a pathway to healing. There's an awareness. There's interrupting the patterns, the revving. There's a whole process of looking underneath the hood, so to speak, and getting back to the original pains or generational trauma or developmental trauma, or whatever it is that is the thing that has been avoided, or the tendency to avoid emotional contact with yourself. Certainly if there's been a lot of neglect in your life, you're not going to have a lot of access to your own feelings and needs. There's a whole process of needing to let go of the identity, whether that identity has been the persecutor, the rescuer, the victim, because based on our life experience and what we have needed to confirm our life experience, we have taken on an identity like victim. And if we stay in the victim mentality and the victim identity, then we're stuck, even if we have processed that trauma underneath, even if we have gotten out of the constant reflex of the things we do that we stress ourselves out by. And there's a whole process in healing as well about relearning intimacy, that vulnerability and connection is safe. So we get out of that isolation state so that we become less prone to the dependency. And, for those who are with someone addicted to drama, first recognize their experiences become your experiences. Despite what you want or think, you cannot fight physiology.
Right.
You can't. I'm sorry. Even if you have meditated for 25 years, you cannot override your physiology to that
So
level.
what does that mean?
It means that if they're having a stress response, so are you. It is built into your genes, into your DNA. It is part of your evolutionary survival. If I come in to your church and I run in and I'm panting and I'm intense and my muscles are tight, every single person in there is going to mirror my response for their own survival, because maybe there's a snake outside. And that anaconda is going to come in, and it doesn't matter what's out there. We are prepared to be more responsive. If we're not prepared to be responsive, we are less likely to survive. So
I developed a saying in ministry, and I want to test it with you.
Yeah, please.
Because it's true. If there's like a fire in the building, that is an emergency everybody needs to be aware of. And there are times where, there's a terrible traffic accident or a child is sick or dying. Those are exceptions.
Yeah.
But what I learned as our church grew was somebody else's emergency doesn't have to be my emergency.
Yes.
And so they present it as an emergency. And I had to go through a rational filter where I'm like, hey, okay, that's a really bad situation. I'm sorry you're in financial hardship. I'm sorry your marriage is not in a good place. But their marriage didn't start to dissolve at 10 a.m. And they called me at 1 p.m. and it needs to be solved by 4 p.m., right? Like it's been, I don't have to drop what I'm doing to solve their marriage. It's like, well, first of all, if I can help them, I have an opening next Thursday or Sunday after service where I'm happy to see them, but I'm not going to drop what I'm doing right now. Is that a healthy response to sort of like interpret the level of emergency or drama that someone is doing? And even if it is appropriate for me to deal with it, I ended up outsourcing a lot of that stuff down the road. But like just to disentangle myself from somebody else's emotional state, or what do you think?
Their emergency is not your urgency. It does not have to match it. You do not, you will have a physiological response. It does not mean you have to match theirs.
Right.
And that's a really important lesson. If they're coming in at a 10, you're going to have some response.
Sure.
But you're not necessarily have to meet them with a 10. And, and there's boundaries you can set up of going like ahead of time. It's like if I have a friend who I know is a deep catastrophizer and they really focus on the negative and they're just going to come over and they're just going to vent, I might say, hey, I got 10 minutes for you, love. Like that's all the time I have. And then, or, hey, I'm happy to talk, but we need to do it on a walk so that I don't feel stuck in one place while we're processing. And hey, here's another thing is I don't have to enable them. I don't have to throw logs on their fire. They're saying this whole story about so-and-so did this and so-and-so did that. I could just be like, that sounds tough. Period. I don't have to give more than that. And I can walk away. If boundaries are not enough, yes, in your walking away, you will trigger their isolation, their pain, and you will become the target of their sense of victimness.
Persecution.
Yep.
Like,
and their persecution.
Oh, Scott's not a good friend. He's not an empathetic person.
Yeah. And that is okay. You will survive and you will thrive without the excess stress in your life. They will be themselves. They will be okay in some regard. Yeah. It is okay for you to take power of your own life. You are not helping them by simply staying in the enabling position.
So what I've found, tell me whether this is unique or true or a general pattern or nuance it as you will, is that when I've done that, and I've done that, I've tried to, somebody's 10 doesn't have to be my 10. It maybe is a 3 or, like the example of a marriage or a financial crisis. It's like, I'm sure that person feels it right now at a 10, but it's taken a long time to build. I can't solve it by 1 o'clock. No. Let's meet on Wednesday or hear the people who can serve. What I've found is that the drama addicts, eventually you get a reputation for like, oh, Carey's kind of level-headed. He's probably not going to give us what we want. And if they're truly a drama addict and they've got a crisis a week, they're going to go somewhere else because they can't get a toehold. Is that typical?
Yeah. If you won't drama bond with them, you're out.
Drama bond.
If you won't drama bond, you're not a good friend. You're not a good support system. You're not someone who really sees them.
Yeah.
They're not going to get what they quote unquote need out of you.
Right.
And so yeah, like I'm a tough therapist, like I have a lot of tools and I am not interested in hanging out with people. It's like crisis hop. That is a boundary of mine. And mostly because, and I have not every single client I've ever had who's addicted to drama, and they have probably sought me out because I am, has never felt like I didn't see them because I have so many tools to be like, let's take a moment here. I noticed that as we started to settle and as you started to settle in your body, that before we could complete that settling, we went on to the next subject. Just curious what happened here. Now, I'm going to interrupt it, but I'm going to interrupt it in a way that's being, recognizing and curious and not blaming and not shaming. And I'm tough when I say I will interrupt someone's pattern like that. I will not let them just crisis hop because they are harming themselves. It's in the same way if I see that they are massively drunk and just saying, here, I'm going to pour you another drink.
Right. So let's get really practical. I want to go through a few scenarios.
Sure.
And this has been so helpful. The boss who's a drama addict, because I get that DM so often. It's like, look, I'm not the senior leader in our organization, but my boss just goes from crisis to crisis, flare up to flare up. Always something wrong. The coworker who is that way, and then the inbound. If
What's
you're
the
leading a lot
mean?
of people, the inbound could be people in your church, customers, clients in businesses.
Yeah.
Right. I think we covered that a little bit. Let's start with the, you're pretty regulated, but your boss is a little crazy. What do you do?
Run. Get another job. Look, we're talking about power dynamics here, and it gets really tricky. Your boss might have gotten to where they are because they thrive off stress and it's perceived as a strength. They have a high tolerance for it, so they seem like they've got things under control, even though they're always in it. I'm going to be honest. I've been asked this question before by a lot of big media sources that are like that focus in business, and it is a really tough position. You have to set your boundaries. You have to go, this is not me. This is not personal. How am I resourcing myself? They're in their crisis. How do I go back to my grounding practices? How do I do my breath work? How do I do my visualizations that bring me to a more settled place? How do I not enmesh with their crisis? I know it's contagious, but how do I not enmesh with it? If I have a history of codependency, I'm going to enmesh like crazy. How do I not enmesh? How do I visualize that there is a watery space, a buffer between me and my boss that they can't get through? And how do I come back to that every time they try to breach it? So it's about really resourcing yourself and realizing this is a power dynamic. This is the challenge of hierarchical power dynamics anywhere. If your pastor is addicted to drama, or your boss is addicted to drama, or the leader in your organization is addicted to drama, there is a serious power dynamic that you may not be able to tackle.
And if you don't enmesh with them, you might get passed over the promotion or terminated, right? 100%. Like those are real risks. Yeah. Is there any way, because this is probably the most FAQ I get, the most frequently asked question. Yeah. People are like, well, I want to help my boss get better. No. Okay. No, do not. Okay. I'm going to give you one thing. Okay.
Buy my book, anonymously send it to them. That is the only help you are allowed to do.
Okay.
Yep. Anonymously send it to
right? Because if it's attached to you, if it's attached to you, I've got some strategies like ask questions and all that. But at the end of the day, I always talk about the glass ceiling. Yeah. Like eventually, you may not be able to rise any higher in the organization. Eventually, you might have to just cut it and go and find a healthier workplace. And you would agree with that. Yeah.
Look, I'm going to be really clear with you. This is a tough addiction to navigate. from an outside
It's so normalized, right?
It's
everywhere.
so normalized. It is extraordinarily hard to recognize for the individual. And it is you are asking someone, you like quote unquote want to fix them. You are asking them to give up their survival responses. You are asking them to give up their survival responses. The answer is no. I have trained thousands and thousands of hours. I have worked with patients for thousands and thousands of hours to be able to be as skillful as I am. And it is still tricky.
Yeah.
I want to give you as much grace to say that's not your job, unfortunately, and you're not going to be able to do it by yourself.
Wow. That's honest. I mean, on one hand, we all live in this utopian world where we have a conversation and people get fixed. But what about a coworker?
Yeah.
Let's go there.
That's a little easier.
It's someone you share a cubicle with or an office with or someone you have to do project management with or you're on the same task and they're just like always got something going on. There's always something. What do you do with that person?
Yeah, it's some of the same tools as I said before, but it's easier because the power dynamics aren't there.
Right.
Even if it's like literally I scoot my chair slightly to the left just to feel more space. Like that tiny little action can feel empowering in your nervous system. I can have things in my cubicle that give me a sense and remind me of my own peace, that remind me of my own comfort and safety. I do not participate in the gossip. Do not participate in it. When they come to talk to you about it, just say, I hear you. Do not add. Do not try to say that, hey, I don't gossip, because that's just going to agitate them more.
Yeah. Tried that.
Yeah. It's really about minding your business, and your business is you. And if you're in a business, the business is actually your work.
So it's kind of like what we talked about earlier. Eventually, if you set up some boundaries, they'll realize I'm not getting anywhere here, and they'll probably find someone else. What about? Yeah. Okay. Say more about that.
Well, unless they see the challenge and like it.
Right. It's like, oh, I'm going to convert you.
I definitely, as a kid, was like, ooh, you're calm. I am going to mess this up. Like, I was definitely a provocateur.
That was a conscious thought. Wow.
I mean, like, I did stand-up comedy. Like, I loved the idea. Like, I would pick on the person who seemed most like at ease in the audience. You know? Like, I knew the people, you could always sense the people who would get on board and like, and rile it up and make it really good. And then you could see the people you can make so uncomfortable as the provocateur. I'm not like that anymore. Maybe a little bit on my podcast.
So, okay. What about someone you're supervising? So you're a boss, you're fairly well regulated. Yeah. But now you've got a staff member, team member, key volunteer who's addicted to drama. Yeah. What are some, because the power dynamics in your favor.
Power dynamics are in your favor, and that helps. There's a lot of language that you might say, hey, I notice this feels really complicated. And I'm wondering if you can talk me through the steps of it together, or I'm going to model what I think is more of a, efficient response. I'm curious, like, as you watch me, what's that like for you? Does that feel aligned? So I might model a more regulated nervous system, a more regulated, and by regulated, I mean a more efficient use of attention and energy.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. So modeling can be a big piece of it, of like helping them relearn that what efficiency of energy and attention might look like. Helping them change their barometer in that way.
And if you really are investing in them and you care how they're doing, not just what they're doing, you could read a book together. You could read Addicted to Drama together.
You could start a book club with my book as the first book.
No, I mean, we read books as a team. And, if that was, I don't think we really have anybody who's addicted to drama on our team. But, I can think of times where I almost hired somebody or that kind of thing. It could be really helpful. Any other tips for just dealing with the general drama that is life? And I mean, our news cycle feeds on drama, social media feeds on drama, family dynamics are often very dramatic. And What do you do with all that, and how do you keep your heart? Because what we talked about today, just quoted Jean-Paul Sartre, but Blaise Pascal. Man or humanity's chief problem is our inability to sit quietly alone in our room. There's a lot to that, right?
There's a lot to that. It's a great quote.
It is a great quote, and I've thought about that many, many times over my life. And in my 30s, I couldn't sit quietly alone in my room, and I'm learning to do that in my 50s. But that takes discipline and practice, and you have to get really, really comfortable with all of your feelings and not getting entangled in other people's drama. And it's work.
Yeah. I mean, that quote is the quote for an addiction to drama. It's like the inability to be quiet. It's not like it's just an inability to be quiet. It's that the quietness is a pathway to being in touch with yourself and the feelings and all the experiences that have been there. And that doesn't feel safe. Mm-hmm. So notice in your life, where are the places that take you away from peace? Like just as a 1-week experiment. Okay, I'm watching the news. I need to be informed, but that's taking me away from my peace. Okay, I'm scrolling through social media. I want to keep up with my friends, but that's taking me away from my peace. Mm-hmm. So if I can not only recognize where I'm being taken away from my peace, but start to build tolerance for peace. It's not that, and that's a titrated process. It's like, what's the littlest amount of calm that is okay in this moment? Can I settle a little bit more? Can I relax a little bit more? Can I be with the quietness 1 second more? Not 20 minutes. Can I meditate for 1 second? Can I meditate for 2 seconds? And we're building up the muscle of tolerance for peace. Yeah. And then you have even more awareness of going, look, I got to limit my news. I got to limit my family time. I got to limit my social media time, because these are all things that are challenging and limiting my peace, which so many of us say we want, but so many of us have the tolerance for.
Yeah. It's a good word. We have a lot of young leaders who are starting things.
Or rather, so many of us don't have the tolerance for. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think I knew what you meant. We have a lot of young and aspiring leaders who are starting things. Are there practices you can have early on to kind of drama-proof what you're building?
Oh, I like that.
From the ground up.
All right, I like that title, Drama-Proof.
Drama-proof.
That'll be the follow-up book. So the question is, how do we prevent drama for ourselves?
Yeah, when you're building something from the ground up, are there particular best practices to make sure that this doesn't become part of the culture?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm an entrepreneur and I have several businesses and I lead a big team. I lead many big teams actually, and I have zero drama in my staff. But part of that is I trust my gut at this point. Is I'm like, when I'm hiring, I'm like, no, they seem so lovely, but I know the stirring that lies beneath. So that's one thing for me, is like, I've really learned to trust, having had a lot of time and practice of where there might be potential for drama. And I set up really clear communication channels. We talk about our feelings. I know it's weird in business, but like, I have my, right after this, I have my Wednesday meeting where we spend the first 20 minutes checking in. How are you? How was your week? And people are vulnerable in it because we've set the environment that this is a safe space to process. Yeah. I did that in the beginning. I've been like, I'm having a really tough day. I felt really rejected by this media source about my book, or something, whatever. And so modeling the willingness to be in contact with oneself, and you'll start to notice those who avoid it. And you'll start to notice the strategies to which they avoid it with. And that's helpful information. So, helping people, supporting people to be in touch with their feelings, their needs, having spaces and places and people to talk to in a workplace or in a church or wherever it is, or in a temple or wherever, that they can be supported with time, space, permission to not have an exaggerated response, but to actually be with the underlying feeling that exaggerated response is distracting them from.
Wow. Sounds like a good intake process there for sure. Well, any other final words? Final thoughts?
I think, it's just one of empathy, which is for those who are addicted to drama, they're just trying to find their way back home to themselves. Yeah. And there are, unfortunately, a lot of survival mechanisms and strategies that prevent them from doing that. Mm-hmm. And, we all want to just be at home in ourselves. And when your sense of home, whether it's your birth home or your early environment or your body, has been a place of a lot of pain, then it makes sense we will have avoided that. And yet there's an innate desire to come home. And that is the healing path that just you modeling your own your own comfort in yourself might support someone else in doing the same.
There's a lot here in this hour and a bit that I think can be unpacked over many, many years. I'm so grateful for it. The book, by the way, is called Addicted to Drama. It's available everywhere. Here, let me get this right. For YouTube, it's available everywhere you can get a book. It's a great book. I really enjoyed it. Extremely well researched. And tell us your different channels today and where we can find you online, Scott.
Absolutely. So my website is probably the hub of all my happenings. So that's Dr. Scott Lyons, DrScottLyons.com. Yeah. And you can there's some quizzes there where you can see, am I addicted to drama? Do I know someone addicted to drama?
Use at your own risk. Yeah.
There's more information about the book and links to the book. There's access to my podcast there, which is, unpacks the book and other subjects in a very spicy, fun way. And I'm also on social media, especially on Instagram at Dr. Scott Lyons as well.
Scott, thank you so much. I've learned a lot today and really grateful for your work. Thank you. And for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.